If The Rescuers Down Under is ever brought up today, it's mostly as an asterisk, an answer to the trivia question, what was the first sequel that the Walt Disney Animation Studios ever produced? And it's also an asterisk, is sort of an odd outlier, smack dab in the middle of the Disney Renaissance, released in a sequence with The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and The Lion King. In other words, 4 of the studio's biggest movies ever. This studio was on an extreme historic hot streak, and Rescuers Down Under is just right there. Also, it was not a financial success. It opened the same day as Home Alone in 1990. And Jeffrey Katzenberg, the studio chief, he famously pulled all the advertising from TV, all the advertisements for Rescuers Down Under from TV, from the press, the day after the movie premiered, because it was clear the movie had run into the buzzsaw that was Home Alone and it wouldn't be making any money. Mike Gabriel, the co-director of the movie, he says on the Skull Rock podcast, in a great interview with him, he said that when he was offered the job to direct The Rescuers Down Under, the first thing he said was, "Why are you making a sequel to The Rescuers? That doesn't make much sense." Listen to that interview. It's very good. He says now, like, he realizes that was a big dumb thing to say, being offered your career big break. He'd never directed a movie before, but it was actually a reasonable question to ask. It was a very strange idea. I mean, The Rescuers had come out in 1977, and between the original theatrical run that it went on and then a series of re-releases, it was actually Disney's biggest moneymaker in decades. But it's still a strange idea. We're going to take this old movie that's not that well remembered. It's not like it's Pinocchio or Cinderella or whatever, and we're going to put the characters into a different situation. But then again, when you think about it some more, there is a kind of sense to it, because Bianca and Bernard, the main characters from The Rescuers, they're detectives basically. And what do detectives do? They take another case. So it's very easy to do a sequel, much, much easier than doing a Cinderella or Sleeping Beauty sequel. These characters, they just take another case. But if you watch The Rescuers Down Under, you will be forgiven for thinking that this seems like a movie where they had an idea about a boy and his bond with an eagle down in Australia and him getting into some trouble. And then the studio very cynically grafted an existing intellectual property, The Rescuers, onto it. But actually, it kind of happened in reverse. Jeffrey Katzenberg had gotten caught up in the Australia craze of the mid-1980s when Crocodile Dundee was the biggest movie in the world. America had Aussie fever. And as that Phil Hartman character from that episode of The Simpsons says, they thought it would never end, but of course it did. But while he got swept away in the Aussie fever, he greenlit the sequels to The Rescuers, put it in Australia. Bernard and Bianca, they have to go down to Australia. So there you go. By the time the movie came out, nobody cared about Australia anymore. Sorry, people in Australia. The Americans didn't know what they had. They said goodbye. They said good eye to Australia. That combined with the movie's bad luck of being released at the same time as Home Alone, it didn't help. It made for a disaster. You would hope that when you watch the movie now, when you watch Rescuers Down Under, you're seeing a secret hidden gem in the Disney vault, but you're not. The movie's fine, and there are great things about it, especially in the animation. In animation circles, it's a very important movie for innovating the use of CGI, integrating CGI into traditional hand-drawn animation, and it was also the very first movie to ever make full use of the CAP system, digital animation system developed by Pixar. Allows them to do digital coloring and post-production. So by some measurements, The Rescuers Down Under is the first ever true digital film and allowed them to do things with the medium that they'd never been able to do before. The other thing that's interesting about the movie is that it's like a very specific mix of old and new. It looks like a Disney movie from the 90s with the budget and the technology and the creative genius of all the people working in that animation studios. But its story itself has like a very leisurely pace. It's very modest. It doesn't have the sort of wisecracking, like joke a minute energy of the other Disney 90s movies. So you feel like you're watching an older Disney movie, but that looks as good as the 90s era Disney movies looked. And then, so I watched this movie. I watched it all the time as a kid, but didn't remember a thing about it. But I'm watching every Disney movie in order because I give myself weird projects to do. And so I finally revisit this movie, probably for the first time in 30 years. And the first 2 minutes of the movie, I would say, are extraordinary. They're really wonderful. They show off the possibilities that are opening up because of the new tools available to the animators. Like, it starts with this really fast pan across a huge field of flowers toward a series of huge domed rock formations. We pass the domed rock formations and then we speed up toward a small hut in front of an enormous sandstone monolith. And again, I had not seen this movie in decades, but it all came back to me, and just the visual elements brought it back to me, which is interesting. Like, kids connect to animation, I think, because at a certain point you get poisoned, maybe by school. I don't know what it is, but you start to think about stories in terms of screenplays and 3-act structures and saving the cat and all that. But at an earlier age, you are just responding to visuals, and movies, more than anything else, are a visual medium. They're a series of moving images. And so it's interesting to suddenly see things like this opening sequence and be like, oh, I feel like I felt back then. And then even little individual shots, like the main character, Cody, he has this pocket knife in his room, and then he sleeps on a hammock covered in a pile of clothes. And all of these were just so vivid in my brain, even though I didn't realize they were still there. But yeah, we're 100 seconds into the movie, and I feel like I'm watching a masterpiece. Unfortunately, it keeps going after that. Cody, the main character of the movie, he's very boring. Even by Disney protagonist standards, he is an absolute drip. Also, inexplicably speaks with an American accent, despite living in the most Australian location possible. He is so Australian, but he talks like this. Oh boy, I'm just a little kid going on my adventure. And he could talk to the animals. It's that kind of world where you can just talk to the animals. So he hears about an eagle who's been caught in a poacher's trap. He goes and he finds the eagle. He frees the eagle, and the eagle, very, very big eagle. It's like 5 times the size of a human. Mike Gabriel, the co-director, he said that he was very excited by the possibility of bringing Disney's very talented animators to Australia and putting Australia's very unique animals to animate them for the first time ever, like at scale. Like, here, you will see Australian animals in a Disney movie. And that is a really cool thing that this movie does. But I also like that it's not tied down so much into showing real things. Like, this eagle's like 20 feet long and weighs 700 pounds. And it's okay that eagles don't really exist in the world that are that big. That's sort of the magic of the thing. But Cody, he gets kidnapped by a poacher named McLeach. And in McLeach, we have the other major reason to watch this movie. McLeach, he's an underrated, great Disney villain. George C. Scott does the voice. And even though ideally you would want a very scary Australian in this role, George C. Scott is so menacing and so weird here. There is a scene where he has the kid pushed up against a wall, and he is just throwing knives at the walls right next to the kid just to scare the shit out of the kid, just because he loves tormenting this kid and he loves being evil. And I love watching it, and I am on McLeach's side. But like the first movie, there is a real sense of danger for the kid. I think that this might be the pair of movies in the Disney canon that are intended for an audience of children, but that show the most real peril for the child protagonists. Like, if you watch the first Rescuers movie, Penny, who's a much better character, Penny is the hero of that movie. She gets put into the most cruel situation where she has to go down into a mine that is in danger any minute of flooding. And she's like, can I please come out? I don't want to drown. And they're like, no, just stay down a little longer, Penny. It's great. I was really, really impressed. They would never put a child in that much danger in a movie today. But yeah, 20 minutes into The Rescuers Down Under, the titular rescuers finally show up. And you know the rescuers, of course. You remember those mice from that movie from 13 years ago. We leave the Australian movie and enter another movie that takes place in New York City, where Bernard and Bianca, voiced by Bob Newhart and Eva Gabor, they are living their best lives as successful society mice, but you know that this is a movie that has no idea what to do with them, because it's doing what I think is quietly the most tired trope for a sequel. When you watch a romantic couple get together in the first movie, and then it's the second movie, and the movie clearly has no idea what to do with their dynamic. So what they have the male character do is really wants to ask the female character to marry him, but he keeps getting interrupted, or he can never find the right moment. And that's their arc in this movie. But they are drawn into this most dire quest to go to Australia, go all the way to Australia and rescue the dumb kid. Their presence in this movie is so unnecessary. You could remove them and the movie would not change one iota, but it is called The Rescuers, so they have to be there. And Bob Newhart and Eva Gabor, they are charming. So that's nice and that's fun. They get down to Australia and they hook up with like a kangaroo mouse named Jake. He's both kangaroo and mouse, and he's dashing and cool and badass, and he's everything that Bob Newhart, that nebbishy nerd, that he is not. So, of course, Bob Newhart starts to worry, not only will I not be able to ask my future wife to marry me, but I'm going to get cucked by this kangaroo mouse. But, you know, even that isn't much of a fuss. They save the kid, they save the eagle, they orchestrate the eventual presumed death of the poacher, which breaks my heart. None of it seemed to amount to something that was worth the work that went into this movie, but like I'm glad it exists. Like you get really beautiful sequences. There's a great sequence where the kid Cody is being pulled behind the eagle and he's water skiing. There's no reason for this sequence to exist other than to show off how great the animation looks and, you know, to show the bond with the kid, the majesty of this world and of Australia. And I love the poacher and I love his dynamic with his pet. He has this evil iguana named Joanna, and they have like a weird codependent relationship that I actually think is kind of sweet. And there's a stretch of the movie that takes up a really long time where John Candy is the voice of the seagull and he hurts his back. And so he spends a ton of time like under the care of a Nazi doctor who's going to give him all this unnecessary surgery. It's very confusing. This is the case where I do have nostalgia for the movie and parts of my brain are being activated because of the recognition. Oh, I remember that rock formation. I remember the pocket knife. The premise of my podcast, Load Bearing Beams, is to really examine nostalgia. Is it going to affect the way we view things? And this is a case where like my nostalgia is absolutely not enough for me to overcome the fact that this isn't that fun of a movie. The enjoyment I get out of the movie is way more clinical. It's appreciative of the quality of the animation and appreciation for the era that it was made in. So ultimately a pretty okay movie that looks great, but its story, it's just kind of so-so. Do you like The Rescuers Down Under? Did you grow up with it like I did? Have you revisited it as an adult? And what did you think? And I guess just another note, on Load Bearing Beams this week, we covered the movie Fern Gully, which is another Australia set movie, although it's kind of the reverse of Rescuers Down Under because that was made by a largely Australian crew, but they tried to hide the fact that the movie's set in Australia. They don't really acknowledge it, and they hire American voice actors. And this movie was made by an American crew that is really selling Australia. So thanks for watching. Check out Load Bearing Beams. Check out Fern Gully. Check out Rescuers Down Under. And until next time, see you later.